Good morning. My name is Jane Kressman. I'm one of the elders for infants, and I'm very pleased to welcome you this morning. This webinar is the second in a series that Elders for Infants and the University of St. Thomas are sponsoring that really are designed to add depth to our collective understanding of really what helps or hinders healthy development in prenatal to 3. Before we begin, I just want to mention kind of 3 practical things. One is please mute your microphones and turn off your personal videos as members of the audience. We will have questions and answers at the conclusion of the conversation that you'll be hearing this morning. And that's the second item, and to use the chat function. And Sandy Heidemann and I will be gathering and synthesizing these questions for later in the program. And number 3 is mark your calendars for October 14th's quarterly Prenatal to 3 policy forum. We'll come back to that at the end, but just wanted to mention that. So again, thank you for being with us this morning. We are seizing this moment to highlight an important and often overlooked group that is missing from our conversations in prenatal to 3. And that group is Black fathers, who are often in the shadows and too often shackled by systems that prevent their full participation as dads. Fatherhood in general has been an important topic for elders. Jim Nicolai, Glenn Palm, and Dave Ellis have frequently reminded us of how fathers in general are missing from the equation in prenatal to 3 discussions. And so they have called out this lack of favorable support and acknowledgement of fathers in practice and policies. So that is what shining a light means to us. To get us to this morning, we've had 2 prior programs. Dave Ellis and Charles Dixon described the situation facing Black fathers in Minnesota in July at our forum, regular forum, and asked us to be uncomfortable about what we're learning as mostly a white audience. One, that historical trauma is not history. It continues to play out in our daily lives and especially in the lives of Black men. Most early childhood systems exclude fathers. In August, we heard from Elder Glenn Palm and Andre Dukes as they reflected on race and gender equity from the lens of our roles as professionals and in practice. We were left with the question of if men's parenting were seen as a resource and not a negative, a whole way of thinking would result as we think about Black fathers. And that's our agenda for today. We're pleased to hear from 4 Black gentlemen who have spent most of the last 25 years of their lives dedicated to supporting Black fathers, and many more years as Black fathers. But we are grateful for their decades of work and also for their willingness to share with us this morning. Guy Bowling, Charles Dixon, Andre Dukes, and Clarence Jones will be speaking with Glenn Palm and with each other. And I would just say that we as white elders need to acknowledge our limits and also to say that we are so grateful to be able to engage and have you with us as co-learners in the audience as we are ourselves working to stay uncomfortable as we learn and as we lean in and as we continue to do our own work to address these stark and troubling challenges, but also to see it in the light of what's possible. And that's where we will move from now as to a conversation of Black fathers shining a light on what works. And at this point, I would turn it over to my colleague, Glenn Palm, and we'll go from there. By the way, when you have questions, you can send them in at any time to chat, and we'll be watching and trying to do our best to synthesize and come back to that at the end. Again, thank you, and Glenn, welcome.
Thanks, Jane. Again, good morning and welcome to part 3 of this series on Black fathers, with the focus today being on shining a light on what works. I want to give just a brief overview of the different sections that we'll talk about before we get started today. In addressing racial and gender equity, Black fathers, if mentioned at all, are a footnote. And that's about it. Today, we want to highlight the potential of Black fathers as protective factors for young children, families, and focus on what works to provide support to realize this potential. In the first part, we're going to ask each of our presenters to introduce themselves and answer the question, why work with fathers is so important to you? We're in part 2 going to ask for a brief review of the benefits of early support for fathers. 30+ years of research has demonstrated the benefits of positive father involvement on children, families, fathers, and community. And we want to at least touch upon and acknowledge this before getting into programs. So part 3 will be programs for fathers. What have we learned about what works? Practice lessons that help us understand strategies that are successful at engaging and supporting young men as new fathers. That's what we will address in part 3. In part 4, we're going to look at vision of what is needed to provide the support. What do we need to change in social attitudes, policies, programs, and legislation to realize this vision? And then part 5, we'll have some time for questions. So we hope that we get some good questions from you. If we can go to slide 2. I'd like to welcome my colleagues in the fatherhood field who bring a wealth of experience, knowledge, and passion to their work with fathers and their understanding of what works. So we're joined, as Jane said, by Andre, by Guy, and by Clarence and Charles this morning. And I would also like to thank them for taking the time to share their stories, their practical knowledge, their insights, and their vision for what is needed to unleash the potential of young Black fathers as protective factors for their children, families, and communities. And slide 3, please. So we're going to start with introductions, and we ask each presenter will share their story about why working with fathers is important to them. And we'll start with Andre and then go to Guy and Clarence and Charles. So Andre, can you start us off?
Thanks, Glenn, and good morning, everyone. Andre Dukes. I am the Senior Director of Collective Impact Early Childhood at the Northside Achievement Zone. I support our early childhood strategy as well as supporting our Family Academy. And so I've been studying early childhood now for probably 10 years. And one of the things that really stood out to me in the literature was the lack of father representation. And so as a young father myself at that time, really had questions about, the contributions that fathers make, particularly to child development. And so was introduced to Michael Lamb's work and several others that had begun to really tell the story of the ways in which fathers are assets to their children, especially in the early years. And so also had an opportunity to meet Glenn Palm, who really has taught me a lot over the years about the contributions of fathers. And so, growing up where my biological father was killed before I got the opportunity to know him, and then having a wonderful stepfather that taught me how to become a man. I really, just appreciated the connections that I had with him and with others in our community who kind of stood in the gap as a father to me. However, I really didn't feel the connection that I thought I wanted with my stepfather. and, other male. So I really, understood the importance of the relationship that fathers have with their children, because I was just yearning that relationship myself. And so as I began to really understand more about development and the importance of not only relationships, but also environment and how I can play a role in that, it just inspired more questions. And I think that's the beauty. The more that we learn about fatherhood, there are more questions and more that we can learn. So that is, really, my interest. I have now started to develop a parent education curriculum called Proud Papa that is specifically geared towards celebrating the natural ways that fathers contribute to the development of their children, and just celebrating fatherhood in general. And I think you're.
Oh, yeah. Guy, you're up next.
All right. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, everyone, for participating today in our conversation on Black Fathers Shining a Light on What Works. I think I can't see myself, but I can hear myself, so hopefully everybody can hear me. My name is Guy Bowling. I'm a trainer. I'm a facilitator. I've been a public speaker, director, manager, and I'm currently am a Bush Fellow for this year through the Bush Foundation. I am a workforce development manager of the Father Project, a program of Goodwill Easter seals. I'm also, I think the two most important accomplishments I've done in my life is the fact that I'm a father of two children. David, he wouldn't want me to say his age, and my daughter Avery, and she definitely wouldn't want me to say her age. But I'm also a grandfather of two grandchildren. But when I think about the question, Glenn and everyone, why working with fathers is so important to me, I think I have to peel it all the way back a few layers from a personal level. I think part of it is because I am a father. I grew up in a single parent household, just like a lot of children, unfortunately, in low income neighborhoods in which I lived in the city of Chicago. And I think I made a commitment to myself early on, because my father wasn't in my life, that if I ever became a father, that I was going to be there for my kids. I was going to do something completely different than he did for me. And so it was a personal thing for me at an early age. But unfortunately, the challenges and consequences that comes with, as we all know, growing up with fathers being absent, is that, children get into certain negative things. And so choices that are made because you don't have that guidance or wisdom or direction from a father, let alone living in poverty. And so for me, it contributed to me becoming a teen father at 16 years of age. And then I was a custodial teen father at 17, and I raised my son from birth until he went off to college. So from a personal perspective, I also I'm a grandfather, so I got a chance to see it on the other side as well, and watching my son and supporting him while he's raising his children. And then similar to Andre, my biological father, who I didn't know at all, and I met once when I was a teenager, and then I didn't ever see him again until he had passed away. Next time I saw him, I was at 28, and he was in a casket. He had got tragically murdered in my hometown of Chicago after trying to connect with me for about 6 months. And at that time, I was a working professional. I was a father who was had a 10-year-old child, and I felt at that time that I didn't need him in my life, and so I was angry. So I walked around bitter and angry, and so I never responded to his calls. By the time I was ready to respond to his call, unfortunately, he was tragically murdered, and so that changed me, because I know that the relationship between a parent and a child is unique. We get one father, we get one mother, and if you're ever able to have that relationship, so it's one of my regrets, but it also has fueled me to continue to do the work that I'm doing. And so the work that I'm doing on a professional level is working with fathers with the Father Project. And so I'm very passionate about it. I got 25 years of experience in the fatherhood movement. I've worked with over 25,000 dads, kids, and families. I started with a wonderful organization called MEL. It was a parenting organization that started back in the early 70s, working with parents whose kids were between the age of 0 and 3 at the time. And so I started there where I got my start. But I also know that and the many fathers that I work with, even including myself, men can and will change, but given the proper resources, prevent some of the impediments that's provided through some structural and institutional things, put them in contact and connection, and overcome any barriers emotionally or economically for their kids, and they definitely will be there for their family. So that's it. That's a little bit about me.
Thanks, Guy. Clarence, can we move on to you?
Sure,
Can you
thank
tell us
you.
a little- Yeah.
Good morning, and just like my colleagues before me, I want to thank Glenn and Jane and the Elders Councils for allowing us the opportunity to come and to talk about this issue that is very, very important to us. So for me to start off, I had to start off like Guy did, with his own personal story, which is, I'm a one-night stand. My mother had sex with a guy, and I'm the result of that. She didn't get along with him. She married another guy before I was born, so I got this guy's last name. She divorced him. She married another guy, and he didn't like me. So I found myself going home with my auntie and my uncle on their wedding night. I was my mother's gift to them because my auntie couldn't have children. So I grew up in I'm very fortunate that I grew up in a very, very loving family, but there was always that attachment issue that I had because it was very, very clear that I was not biologically theirs. And so there would be times where they would make differences. They would say things like, don't say anything in front of Clarence because he'll tell his mother. My auntie would say, don't say anything in front of, my mother would say, don't say anything in front of Clarence because he'll tell his auntie. And so I found myself in that kind of dilemma, and I find myself in that kind of sphere. And so I kind of grew up with this idea about feeling somewhat detached. And so I know it was an attachment issue. But as I grew up, like Guy, I didn't find my father until I was 19. So that kind of helped to develop my attitude about fathering. In fact, I never wanted children, but I found myself being married to a lady that had a child. So therefore I became a father, right away. Then we had another child that was biologically mine. But one of the things that I think why this work with fathers is important is because I've been able to look at my life, look at the fact that how important a father is in the life of a child, to look at the kind of support that a father needs to be effective in the life of the child, and also understand the fact that fatherhood comes in a variety of different ways, but we still have the responsibility as men to be fully present in that experience. And so one of the things that has been most important for me, first of all, is to live through my experiences, to look at them from a positive way, to understand that I meet other men who might be going through some of the same similar situations, and understand some of the dynamics about that, but also understand why it's important for a man to stay there, especially if he loves a child, in spite of his relationship with the mother. And so it's been very important for me in this work to tell and to share my life story, but not that I'm the center of the issue, but to talk about how important being a father is, and the joy and the feelings that you have, but also the positive impact that you can see in terms of your legacy. So that is why fatherhood is so important to me.
Thanks, Clarence. Charles, you're up next.
Good morning to everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and share with you today. Following up with all of the people before me, in appreciation for having the opportunity to share. I don't do the personal story much because honestly, it's personal and it makes you vulnerable. Being a brother, usually in all white circles, that's a unspoken request that I'm always vulnerable. Share everything, give everything, and expect nothing in return. Those days are over for me, but for the sake of this conversation, I will make an exception. Born in East St. Louis, Illinois, my mother never knew her father. My father never knew his father. it was difficult for me to speak about parenting without bringing in the historical realities of the plantation, how Black men were minimized, demonized, and really not important. That's valuable in terms of juxtaposing current events. What we see today is a continuation of the past, whether it's Section 8, excluding fathers, whether it's certain allies who frame Black families as only mother and children on their websites and in their rhetoric. These things are important to me as a father, meaning I have to work diligently every day to break negative stereotypes, be on time, articulate properly, answer questions from law enforcement non-threatening, not make white people feel uncomfortable. These are the different masks that most people that look like me have to wear every day. The fact that my people didn't know their fathers, how did my dad know how to be a father? He didn't. My dad and my mom separated. Another man raised me, Douglas Harris. I take my hat off to that brother. He didn't abuse me. Although addiction was a reality where I'm from in Southern Illinois, his work ethic stood out to me. Uh, for example, yesterday I worked from 7 to 10 p.m. because of brothers like him. People like Delroy Calhoun, Kevin Dildy, David Carson, Steve Mincy, Monteith Dixon. These are folks that showed me what it was to be a father. So I have a 15-year-old son. I would like for him to have conversations with his son. Where I'm from, we dealt with corporal punishment all the way through high school. So in my community, being beat or whooped or whipped, variation of plantation whipping with extension cords, this is what we experience. So I don't hit my son. I think it's a difference between discipline and abuse. In closing, I'll say religion had a heavy impact on my life. I had Bible studies all the way through high school, Jehovah's Witness. We mistake spare the rod, spoil the child. That doesn't mean beat your child. What it means is shepherds don't beat sheep. They use the rod to guide sheep if you're about to fall off a cliff, etc. This is what discipline is, and this is what we need to do. If in fact we don't know how, we need to go with what works. It takes a village to raise a child. Let's remove some of those generational gaps, look to our elders for guidance, and ask for assistance when needed. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles, and thanks to each of you for sharing some of the personal stories of where you're coming from and why fathers are important to you. I think it's important for us to hear that, even though, as Charles said, it's not easy to share, and it does make you vulnerable. So thank you. The next section, what we want to do, and we can move on to slide 4. We want to take a look at the benefits of positive father involvement during prenatal to 3, and how this starts with children and ripples through fathers, families, and communities in positive ways if we can support it starting out in a good way. And Andre is going to start out by talking about benefits to children.
Yes, so we know that even prenatally, fathers, when they are present, engaged, consistent, that there is, certainly an impact on the mother, which ultimately impacts the health of the child. And so, we know that we experience, reduced infant mortality rates when, fathers are there to support and provide resources prenatally. But then when the child is born, what we know is that fathers do have some biological changes that take place in terms of their hormones that causes them to be more sensitive and more responsive to baby, which allows them to develop what Clarence talked a lot about, that attachment relationship. We know that the attachment relationship really helps to influence the emotional health and development of children. And then, because fathers tend to take more risks with children, as the children grows into toddlerhood, they may feel more confident and secure in their ability to explore their environment. And so certainly, having that secure attachment relationship with both mother and father, coincidentally, will increase babies' confidence in exploring their environment and feeling safe and secure. But even as, children begin to develop and enter into school, we know that when fathers are involved, there are, certainly cognitive development benefits that support, school readiness, social connections in school. And so much of that is, the interactions that children are having with fathers and the natural ways that fathers engage with children. We know that fathers, especially in play time, are, they take more risks again, but they engage in what we call rough and tumble play, which certainly has, a lot of those cognitive benefits for children. And, one of the things that I think about here is that, a lot of times men are not seen as nurturing, but I want to just highlight the fact that, fathers are nurturing, they just nurture different. And one of the things that we've been talking about with fathers is simple things like the nicknames that we come up with for our children. And most fathers have some kind of nickname for their children. My son is named Scooter. And so, when he was a baby, we could not take our eyes off of him, because if we took our eyes off of him for more than a couple of seconds, he'd be at the edge of the bed or wherever he was, and then we'd have to catch him. He was a Scooter, so his name became Scooter. But this name is really a way that, I connect with him. Not many other people called him Scooter initially. Now everyone calls him Scooter, but I came up with the name, I'll just say that. But it is, kind of our way of bonding. And then I have another name for him too that is more personal that I won't share, but no one else will use that. That's why I keep it a secret, but he knows this name. But again, this is the way that, I'm nurturing a relationship with my son. But then in addition to that, I think that, men are really more supportive of, the kinds of activities that especially boys tend to get into, like sports. And I'm not saying that, that is a gender specific activity, but it is really just supporting kind of the interest and the talents that children have, that has huge benefits for them developmentally, and allows them to, children, to express themselves and being confident in who they are, when they know that they have a father who is on the sideline cheerleading. And whatever it is, it may not just be football or basketball, but it could be, my son was involved in theater, he was in choir, and I was there, on the sideline cheering and singing along. But I knew this meant something to him. I would also, every night sing to him, which I think had something to do with him getting involved in theater and being interested in music. I would have to sing to him every night, and it became a routine, which we know has developmental impacts for children and helps them to be able to anticipate things. And so, it came to the point where he expected me to sing every night. And he would call me if I didn't come in the room at a certain time and say, Dad, you know what the routine is? I need you to come in and sing so I can go to sleep. And so that became this expectation. And again, that speaks to, when fathers are consistent. And so I try to be consistent in my interactions with my sons. And I know that that had, developmental impacts, and the research has supported that. But, just prenatally, supporting mothers, I think, when babies are born, really having those hormonal changes that happen that cause us to be more sensitive and responsive, developing that attachment relationship, which has benefits throughout the lifespan. So it's not just in early childhood, but, really has social and emotional benefits throughout the lifespan. And so I'll just stop there, but there's so many benefits that we know, but I just want to kind of keep it to the early childhood piece for right now.
Thanks, Andre. There are so many things that could be talked about with benefits to children, and the research has done a good job of explicating what those are. Guy, we're going to ask you to talk about benefits to fathers, which is a part that isn't talked about as much, but is equally as important.
Absolutely. Thank you, Glenn. It's been long known that father's presence in households is important for the positive well-being of families, neighborhoods, and youth. But, dads who participate in the lives of their kids provide a steady source of stability and support, but also think about the benefits. And so Andre mentioned, we didn't start out with this conversation with any ground rules, but I'm gonna have to throw one out there and say, okay, what's said here is stays here, especially what I'm about to say personally. So Andre threw out there about nicknames, right? And that's important in a lot of our families and cultures. We all know someone, or maybe ourselves, or someone we're closely connected to have nicknames. And nicknames are important. It just gives that sense of culture, a sense of family, that sense of belonging. So definitely I had a nickname. So what's said here stays here. So my nickname growing up was was Pepto. That was my nickname, like the medicine that you use for stomach aches, Pepto-Bismol. That was my nickname because it means a lot to me. Unfortunately, my mother passed about 10 years ago. But my nickname in the family was Pepto because my mother, when she was pregnant with me, she didn't know she was pregnant. So she kept Pepto-Bismol tablets in her purse all the time. So every time she had stomach cramps, she popped a Pepto-Bismol tablet, and hence the name. So if anyone calls me that, it takes me all the way back to my fond memories of my family and my mother. So just wanted to share that really piece. But when I think about the benefits for fathers, and I think about supports that's needed that impact a whole host of developmental incomes for kids as far as behaviors and academics and health. I think about the other pieces in the 25 years that I've been working with fathers that I see benefits them. I think they have a unique contribution to child development. Fathers do. I think that those early years is establishment with his bond with his child, because fathers don't have the opportunity to really bond with the child, and this from the standpoint of he doesn't carry the child, he doesn't birth the child, and he doesn't breastfeed the child. So really it starts once that child is born. Not that he doesn't love his child, not that he's not thinking about his child, not that he's not involved in the pregnancy, but that bond really begins after that child is born and he's developed that relationship with him, if he has access to his child. And so it gives him motivation. He's excited, and he's also scared, but at the same time, he has a connection and he really wants to be there for his kid because he knows he has a responsibility. Not to say he's not afraid, but he still is excited. Now, what does this mean for me, right? And there's some fear there as well. And so I think that because a lot of times these, especially from the fathers that I've worked with, they go into relationships, without an understanding of love and commitment. A lot of them that I've worked with go into that not necessarily knowing what that actually means. They know they want to do something, but they don't know what that actually means. But also, too, a lot of them didn't. They tend to model what was modeled for them in terms of their parents and their relationships and marriages, if they even were lucky enough to have that within their own family. And I think that the benefits to him is because but also too, he has an unrealistic, idealistic, leave it to beaver view of relationships or marriages. So he's not even really sure, especially if we can see that in his own household. But I also think that when he's there for those early years, that usually are prime indicators on the long-term possibilities for the relationship as he gets motivated to take care of his child. Even if he's no longer romantically involved with mom, those early years, there's a sense of attachment that happens, and then there's nothing he won't do with his child for his child because he has a connection with his child, he has a bond with his child. So I think those pieces are important for him to be there and have access to his child in the beginning. Because he then begins to understand how his child grows and develops socially, emotionally, intellectually, physically. He's there. And so when that child reaches out to him and calls for him, there's a feeling that he gets that boosts his self-esteem, that he gets motivated to make sure that he's there to fulfill that responsibility, particularly economically and emotionally. But also too, from some of those guys who may have grown up without their father, like many of us, shared at the onset, and all of us come at this work, especially what I heard from Clarence and Brother Charles and Andre. It's personal and it's heavy, but we come at it at one level or another. And so there's a motivation that we have to continue to do this great work that we do. And so we also want to make sure that, because these guys want to redeem themselves. They have lives, and maybe they haven't really had any structure in terms of who they wanted to be and what they wanted to do, but it allows them to provide some structure. They want to redeem themselves to show I can be responsible. So I think that initial connection with them in those early years is beneficial and hugely critical. And then also too, I think the last part I just wanted to say is that, there's a community level impact in terms of them being involved in programs at the onset and have the relationship with the kids at the beginning, because society begin to view them as responsible, because you see these negative imageries of these men in terms of, we hear the terminology of deadbeat dads when we really know as dead broke dads. And so they begin to feel embraced by society. They begin to get felt by the community and their families, because they're being perceived as not being responsible, when in actuality, when they show that they are and they're with their kids, there's a different respect that they get. There's a different level of support. There's a different level of help that they get and assistance. And so I think overall, it can benefit his self-esteem, can benefit his relationship with his child, his understanding and motivation to fulfill his obligation, but also the relationship with the mother of his child. Unfortunately, it all starts out really good because everybody's good. The baby's here, the relationship, it may probably some love and emotionally connected to the romantic partner. But unfortunately, as by year 5, year 4, and beyond, the relationship unfortunately began to dissolve. Unfortunately, because a number of different challenges and obstacles that they go into, because they didn't have a lot of skills or knowledge or experiences on what this actually means to parent, other than they only references their own how they were parented, and it begins to dissolve over time. And so those early years are so critical. And then with those obstacles that comes later, we still have to address those and help them overcome those, because that's when they start coming to me and they got these issues. But at the same time, the benefit is to him. If he's there in the beginning, he has a bond and he connects with his child, and he definitely has a relationship with his child, and he's motivated to do the best that he can for his child with support, resources, and networks of individuals that's behind him that can help him navigate any of these challenging systems that he needs to in order to be there for his kid.
Thanks, Guy. That is fathers being motivated to change themselves and be better people because of their kids is something that we hear oftentimes from men as they become fathers. They have to grow up. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
And moving on next to Clarence, talking a little bit about from a family perspective. And Guy started to get into that a little bit, but as you move on, Clarence, can you start?
Gotta unmute yourself, Clarence.
Thank you. I think that we will. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. I want to thank Andre and Guy for bringing up my traumatic childhood name. My childhood name was Hammerhead.
Oh.
And I got my nickname because on the playground, I let 2 little girls try to flip me over. You know how you put you in the middle and they try to flip you over? Well, they couldn't. And I fell on my head. And so I had a big knot. So I was called Hammerhead after that. But I do understand the importance of a nickname. And so my daughter is named Meatmo. So it is important. I want to talk about the family. Over the last few decades, the family structure, as we quoted, has seen some real major changes, and those changes are you're starting to see more dual families, incomes. I mean, the wife is working and the father is working, and I mean everybody is working in the family, and so that has created some changes, especially when we started taking a look at families where traditionally we thought it was just well, I shouldn't say just the man, but we thought about the man as being the main provider. With African American men, though, we have to when we take a look at the family, there are some differences in terms of us being able to, in many cases, be able to provide for our families as the traditional one says. One is economic isolation. There are people that sometimes we just can't get a job. We have to think about the whole idea about, as Charles talked about, we have to think about the trauma of slavery and how people isolate us, those kinds of things. And then we have to also talk about the fact that sometimes our family structure is a little bit different from an African perspective than we have from the Western perspective. I mean, we talk about the village. We talk about that particular piece where other people talk about it. You know, you got two mother, father, you got two children. So there are some differences that are there. But when I talk to African American fathers, one of the things that I often do with them is to talk about the importance of them being engaged in the lives of their children. We talk about from the very beginning, from preconception all the way through. It's very, very important for you to understand your role and the importance of you being engaged in the family. In spite of the fact that you may not have a job making $80,000 a year, you still can provide for your children. And so it's very, very important to understand that. When I meet a young father and we're talking to them about the importance in the lives of their families, especially when they're new fathers, I always talk about them allow the child to breastfeed. Breastfeeding is very, very important. I always talk about if you want a stronger baby, you want a smarter baby, let your baby breastfeed. And sometimes that you have to talk guys through those kinds of things because they feel possessive of that. I talk about the fact about, you know, in the family, it's important for you to respect and nurture the mother as well. A lot of times, you know, in spite of the fact that you might have some difficulties, it's important for you to rub bath water, to rub her feet, those kinds of things. Now, I'm saying these things because we're talking about the importance of the role of the father in the family. A lot of times there are differences. There are times where you don't have what everybody else, quote unquote, say you should have, but there's still things that you should do, and there's still things that you can do. And so for me, it's important for men to understand the fact that they are very, very instrumental in terms of helping their children to understand conflict. Andre talked about the rough house playing, those kinds of things, helping your child to understand how to do things, helping your child to be able to process things. It is so important for us, I think, in terms of looking at families, for men and others to understand that fathers do have a positive impact on their children. And what we want to do in this kind of work is to provide them the opportunities in every way that we can to help them to fulfill that particular mission. It is important in terms of education. Again, getting back to the breastfeeding, it was amazing to me to understand that breastfeeding can increase your child's IQ. You know, I'm like, oh, okay. So those are the kinds of things that I think that's very, very important for us to understand in terms of the positive role of the father. The father, in spite of the fact that he may or may not have a job, still has an important role in terms of making sure that family is safe, that family that family is secure, and that his children are healthy. So that's how I approach this whole idea around the positive role of fathers in the family. Money is good. I like money, and money is necessary. We know that. But there are other things that men can do that can provide for their families.
Great. Thanks, Clarence. And we're going to move on to the last focus, which is on benefits of fathers on the community. And we're asking Charles to talk a little bit about that. So Charles, you're up.
I think from a communal perspective, fathers are important as a chain, a link in a chain, for example. To Clarence's point, breastfeeding is something that we knew worked for us in terms of Aboriginal and indigenous communities. Similac is for women who cannot physically produce milk. In our community, from experience, it's shoved onto mothers. The benefits of lactation coaches, uh, walking brothers through how to be supportive of sisters doesn't exist. Now we have male doulas now. We have some work being done by iChirp and other organizations now, um, African Americans, Babies Coalition, etc., that are pushing that agenda. My personal experience, my 15-year-old son, his mother breastfed until he was 5 years old. My son is um, always been in the higher percentiles of growth and in intellect. Bright young man, read books for leisure, novels, and the irony is he does not enjoy school. After he was not a cute 4 or 5-year-old anymore, um, his relationship with formal education changed in terms of power dynamic with specifically white teachers, etc. So I think a father's benefit to the community is leading by example, um, acknowledging the dysfunction of the past in terms of some of our parenting and not using that as an excuse to continue to parent that way. I think we need to acknowledge roles. For example, Pride of Lions. A male lion has a role. We have to honor that role. We need to be protecting the pride, frankly, from hyenas and vultures, etc. Um, we have to look internally to do that. I think what we knew as Aboriginals, it takes a village to raise a child. Western approaches has reframed that, put the title evidence base on it, and now getting paid from it, meaning 40 developmental assets from the Search Institute, protective factors, blah, 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 blah. A village to raise a child is the essence of these particular movements. I would say let's look at what worked and let's go back to that. Honor women and children and elders, and let's move beyond the notion of community and really build community. How do we do that? Some of our cultures have been stripped via boarding schools and slavery, but there are some cultures that are still intact that we could lean to that may even offer us some assistance, whether it's your religious communities, whether you go and speak to a rabbi, shalom, a imam, assalamu alaikum to the sisters and brothers, or a Christian pastor, minister, etc. You use what works for you. But as a village, we need to be able to acknowledge differences, not let those be barriers, and move forward for the sake of the collective. Now, I don't mean keeping secrets about who's the molesters and protecting these predators. I mean protecting our vulnerable populations, being honest about our flaws internally, and working through those as a community, asking questions and being open to those answers. That would be my feedback.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Charles. Yeah, the impact on community is, and how we think about community, which is really what you're talking about, is important for us to consider, and how communities work together. The next section, we're going to look at programs for fathers and really taking a look at what works. And in planning this session, we did talk about, we had an interesting conversation about the roles and labels we give to these roles in different programs. So we wanted to start with this theme, and then we'll move on to explore some other themes. But we wanted to start out with Guy, who was designated the most experienced in the group to begin talking a little bit about the roles of practitioners in working with fathers, and the labels that we give to those roles and how they're connected to different institutions that people work in. So Guy, if you can start us out in this particular section, and we'll have we had sort of a presentation of each person, the first two parts. This part will have a presentation or a conversation that will flow back and forth amongst the four participants, presenters. So Guy, if you can start us off.
Sure. Thanks, Glenn. Shout out to my brother Clarence for nominating me for this piece, the presentation, based on my experience with case management, is the term that some of us use in terms of that model working with men. But yeah, thank you. So when my first thought on this is that we know that there's a lot of I enjoy having a conversation about fathers in general because I think it touches so many different communities, racially, ethnically, culturally, in terms of low income communities needing resources and support to get these guys in the position of being stable, to be involved in the lives of their kids, but also know that specifically for the sake of this conversation, when you think about Black children, right, specifically, and the work that I've done, I've worked with a number of different populations from Southeast Asian community to Native American community, Latino community, white community, African community, East African, African American. But for the sake of Black fathers, for this conversation, I think about, there's a number of Black children born to single mothers, and it has more than tripled from 1960 to the almost 70% of these kids are born to single mothers. Is most recently is studies show as of 2018. So it's still a high rate of kids being born out of wedlock to single mothers. But it also says Black fathers are less likely to live in households with their kids as than fathers of other races. But even though that may be the case, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're less involved. As a matter of fact, there's many reports that show Black fathers are more involved in Hispanic dads or white dads as it relates to the ongoing caregiving and really the co-parenting relationships with the mothers of their kids. And so on one hand, it shows that the rate is increasing, but on the other hand, it doesn't make them less likely to be involved. And so, but in order for them to be involved, there are also things that can impede them from being involved in terms of systemic things that are going on that puts them and put barriers in front of them that they have to overcome and navigate these pieces in order to be involved. And so one of the things that we talked about, programs that support these men has to have a component that includes case management. And in some programs, those folks that are working directly with these guys, they call them coaches, or they call them navigators, or they call them advocates, or they call them case managers. Either way, they need somebody specific to work with them on personal development things, because those are a lot of things that can get in the way, be it by their own choice or by just systemically what the challenges are for them to overcome. And so you have to have somebody within a program. And so specifically for how we do the work, we have a model in terms of we use a case manager to work directly with these guys to not only address what it is that we can provide him, but also what it is that he needs and what he wants to do and motivate him through a plan that we establish for him to overcome these barriers that prevent him from being involved in the life of his kids. And so a lot of it includes that personal stability, that individual stability. He has to be established first. Then he can go on and begin to eliminate and reduce or remove barriers that prevent him from being involved with his family. And then ultimately, the third prong of what we do, we then put him in a position of leadership to not only give back to his community, but give back to the program and also be able to be an ambassador or just be a leader within his community. And so that's an approach that we have. And so I just think, case management is so critical in terms of working with fathers, particularly from low income neighborhoods, because they need that person, they need that coach, they need that person to push them, they need that person to empower them. It's no different than if we all make New Year's resolutions, after the new year. Hey, we're going to lose so many pounds. We're going to get back in shape. We're going to do this. And they can give us exercise bike and exercise clothes. And they can even give us a nutritionist and recipes for how to eat. But if we don't have anybody to push us to follow through with that plan, then some of us may not have the motivation, even though we had a good idea in our head to do it, but you need that person to continue to push you. And we have learned that in working with the case management person. That's what we happen to call it, because that's the funding term and that's our agency term. But like I said, in other situations, other people say, well, they're not a case, so why call them case managers? But we don't look at them like that. But everybody has their particular terminology. But more specifically, you need that person that's going to push that father, and that case management model works, and that specific thing works because he needs to be established personally. He needs to be stable as a man first, responsibly before he can even begin to understand all the things that are involved in connecting fatherhood piece, because manhood and fatherhood, in my opinion, are joined at the hip. And so I believe that piece is so critical. It's been so critical to our success as a program to have a case manager coaching him, walking him through a plan that mutually was developed between him and that case manager in that program, but also the parenting component and increasing his knowledge and skills and behavior as it relates to being a father. So I think those two go together. But the drawback is case management models are not funded. You know, they rarely are funded specifically to the needs of the father because they want the father. It's almost like merging into traffic. We do such incredible work for the on-ramp, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done before they merge into traffic, before you can just put them out there and expect them to be able to navigate all of these things without that initial stability from the beginning. And so case management is such an important piece in terms of working with fathers, in terms of helping them overcome barriers, especially in navigating system. And then once he is able to navigate the system, once he does get stable, you still need that person behind him to support him in a way that any of us need in terms of just being on the right path and being successful and ensuring, for the sake of this conversation, our kids we're modeling the behavior we expect of our kids long term. So that's where I think about in terms of that model. And I think it's specifically to anyone working with fathers that you have to have case management in place. But one of the barriers, and I think we're going to talk about this a little later, Glenn, is that model is rarely funded.
Yeah. Go ahead, Clarence.
Yeah, I want to agree with Guy. I think one of the things in a human partnership, I don't have a program. And so what I have to do is I have to, when I work with fathers, I have to recommend programs. And just like the guy was saying, you know, every program is not for everybody. You know, one of the things that I often talk about in terms of the work that I do is that I really try to find out where the best fit is, you know, for a father or what program is the best fit for a father. I mean, for example, you guys just talked about it. Sometimes you need case management. Sometimes you just need a mentor, you know, and so you've got all these different programs. And so for me, one of the not, I shouldn't say the challenges, but one of the opportunities that I have, and you know, sometimes, you know, people may not understand my motives for it. One of the things that I try to do is to really find out what every program is good at, so that you can recommend a father, because so many times you can send a person to the wrong program where they are not, and I say that, I mean, and no program is looking to hurt a father, but sometimes you can send a father to a program that is not a good fit for them, and there are programs that are better fits for them. And so part of what I think is important is that we as programs are more clearly identify what it is that we're good at. So that we can make sure that we are more effective in terms of recommending fathers. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
And I just want to add really quick before we move on, Glenn, is that I agree wholeheartedly with what Clarence just said as well. But I think at the same time, it's hard to break those barriers that our guys are up against by yourself without someone advocating for you. Right. It's extremely difficult to be able to do that. And so it makes me think about, you know, the men that come into our program. They're just exhausted, they're beat up, they just need someone to help them, lift them back up, empower them, but also help and walk with them step by step, helping them navigate through those pieces, because a lot of times they can't do it by themselves. And they're already exhausted by the time they come to us because they just were frustrated that they couldn't accomplish the things. And so in order to help them deal with, you know, a lot of those impediments in terms of their progression, as far as just even some of those systemic barriers that we know about, you have to have somebody to walk with them step by step.
Can I just add, I think this is a great conversation. And I think what really sticks out for me is the relationship component. So regardless of the title that we use, what we know is that fathers need supportive relationships. And those relationships need to extend into the community. So there needs to be a continuum of supports. And when I think about the community, I think about places where men naturally gather, that tend to be kind of these informal case management places, if you will, or support places like barbershops, where men are talking about their experiences as fathers and talking about the challenges and helping each other sharing strategies, sharing resources in some
Mm-hmm.
cases.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about the village concept. We when we are in relationship, we share resources, we help each other,
Right.
we stand in the gap.
That's
And
right.
so, as I think about the importance of case management, and yes, we do need programs, we need funding, and those programs need to start earlier. And we'll talk about that in the policy section. But I think, what really is important to highlight is the relationship component.
That's
and
right.
how the community can be set up to provide the support that fathers need.
Absolutely. And it's not just case management, Glenn, it's intensive case management because they deal with the multitude of issues and you have to address those. And a case manager, as opposed to just referring out, intensive case management is really specifically working with them on a number of different issues and helping guide them through that process.
And I do want to say this too, Andre and Guy, I like that because, we meet fathers at different levels of the continuum. And so it's really important for us as practitioners to work together collaboratively in order to make sure that fathers are getting what they need. And that's really what I'm trying to go to.
Charles, do you want to come in and have a say here?
I would add that what I saw as being effective, I started working specifically with fathers in 2006. What I saw being effective is weekly support groups where men could be open and honest about what they're dealing with without fear of a probation officer reprimanding them or getting into an argument with a spouse because they said something that was sexist or insensitive. We were trained to be sexist. I won't use the term, but we weren't raised to be sensitive. In this society, we were raised to be physical, non-emotional, and absent. For the most part, history explains that. If trauma is passed via DNA and epigenetics, it is a possibility that the recurring traumatization of seeing our children taken, sold, removed from our presence, it's a defense mechanism to turn that sensitivity off. Some young brothers don't even know why they do it or how they do it because we haven't studied history well enough to understand the current implications that it has on us and our families. I would say, in addition to the support group piece, we need our white allies to walk us step by step on how to become evidence-based. Right now in EAP, which is an employee assistance program, there are no culturally specific therapists for myself. Why is that? Because they don't exist? No, because somebody that don't look like me made a decision to exclude them. That's the facts. If we can't be honest with ourselves, these conversations will always have a cyclical nature and continue to be extremely frustrating for people like myself. In terms of solutions, allow us to be the solution to our own problems. Don't come in with the savior mentality and start a nonprofit and you're still the CEO making six figures, but we're the case managers and custodians. Please get out of the way. We have empathy and compassion to do the work. We have experience, formal education, etc. That to me is a solution.
Okay. I'm just looking at our time and thinking about, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the last part, which is vision and moving past barriers. So I'd like to get into that last, the next slide, if we could have it. And in the very first session that we had in this series, Dave Ellis left us with the question, what is needed to support fathers? And we heard a little bit from a programmatic perspective, what's needed in terms of support groups, intensive case management, a network of support, a continuum of support. We heard all of those kinds of things as we just talked. In this section, we'll talk about vision. What do we need to move past barriers and achieve the benefits from positive father involvement? And Charles, you kind of led us to this point with your comments about getting out of the way. But I want to start out and ask Clarence if he'll share a little bit about the concept of the first 1,001 days, which we talked briefly about in our conversations, and then we'll let everybody have at it with what is needed in terms of achieving this vision. So Clarence, if you could start us off.
Sure, thank you. So Glenn and I were just talking one day, and we were talking about the role of fathers in the lives of their children, and we were talking about this whole this concept from 0 to 3. And as he was talking, I started thinking about we need to take a look at the 1,001 day journey of fatherhood. But we need to start with the whole idea around preconception. I mean, there are some things that we should be talking to men about before they become fathers. That would be the first day. The next 9 months, if you considered every month having 30 days. I mean, we know that some months have more, sometimes less. And then the next 2 years, which would be about 365 days, we would come to 1,001 days of a journey. And I think that men need that. Men need to understand the role that they play in the lives of their children. And I think we've talked about that from preconception all the way through, the birth process. I mean, after birth, those kinds of things. And so I think that it would be great for us to look more at that whole idea about how we should be providing information, appropriate, accurate information, especially for African American men, giving them some information in terms of how and what they should expect for that journey in order to have healthier children and have a healthier family.
Yeah, I'll jump in and just piggyback on that and saying, the earlier, the better in terms of those supports. And so someone mentioned earlier about doulas, but, even, upon conception, having someone that can coach fathers, help them to, understand how they can interact with their infants and feel comfortable in doing so. Some fathers really have not been told, the proper way to hold a baby, change a diaper, those kinds of things, and may need someone to walk alongside them in that. And, a peer, someone that, has been a male that has been through the experience, I think is so important. And then having, parent education courses that are really designed specifically for men, which brings me to, Proud Papa, and what we are trying to accomplish through that is to, help fathers really understand the developmental benefits that they contribute to the life of their children, but then also helping them to be reflective in their parenting. A lot of times as parents in general, we think about the things that we are doing for our families and for our children, but we often don't take the time to reflect on the benefit it has on us. And so really in our interactions with our children, I'm really asking fathers to really reflect on how they are benefiting from that interaction and not so much the benefit that they are offering, but what's changing in you? How are you thinking differently? And so that kind of coaching, I think, is really helpful for fathers to really develop agency in their role and feel more confident in engaging with their family.
I'd like to make a quick comment. Andre, when you started talking about the right way to hold a baby, there was a book I read one time that said there's 285 different ways to hold a baby. So as long as you're not bouncing that baby on its head, you're doing good. And I think that's what we have to help people understand is that, fathers hold the baby out to the world and women hold the baby in. I mean, and so it's not bad, it just is, and so I agree with you 1,000%. And I have to be one of those male doulas. So I love, as somebody said before, I love this conversation because I think it really helps to revitalize me as well, to know that even though we don't talk much, I mean, this kind of forum helps us to understand a little bit better where we're trying to go.
Yeah, and fathers, especially young fathers, are always afraid, like that first time when you're like, what do I do? How do I hold, And so helping them to get over kind of that apprehension.
Right.
But you're absolutely right. Yeah.
It's so funny that you say that, Andre. I just think about what I've heard from the young fathers I've worked with, and particularly when I was a young father, as a teenager, as a single dad. I just remember just my own paranoia. I was afraid because I didn't have the luxury to have a crib or anything like that. So my son, as an infant, just slept in the bed with me, and I'm usually a mover in the bed, but I sat almost paralyzed in the bed when he slept with me, thinking that I was going to roll over and crush him, right? As a young man, but also too, I would check on him from time to time throughout the night. As a young man, I would put my ear to his mouth to see if he was still breathing. I must have did that like 10 times a night, just out of my own paranoia, just not having the skills, nor the experience of being a young father. So there was a sense of, is everything okay? I would check on him all the
And I'll just add one piece, and then Charles can bring us home. But I think the other key piece in terms of policy and programs is really adopting a diverse family systems perspective. So we've talked about the many ways that families are made up, but I think really honoring the fact that fathers want to be involved, and even in our case consultations, inviting fathers in and asking them questions, directing questions to the father, and not making assumptions is important. I think that in terms of just even the publications in the literature, using male pronouns is important, so that men can see themselves in the literature and feel inviting in our environments, in our programs, making sure that images of men with children is so important in developing a father-friendly environment. And so these are program policy things that I think that often go unnoticed, that are small wins, the low-hanging fruit that we can really engage in to create more father-friendly experience. And then, we take that up to, more of the policy levels that I know Charles will talk more about.
The policy piece is, I use the Minnesota term, interesting. There's frankly not a political will to fund culturally specific or relative services for poor fathers. I would even add that there is an uphill battle for poor fathers in general, regardless of how they identify with that illusion of race, but I'm talking specifically about my community now. There are programs that are successful. There are programs that were cut in the past simply because of funding. We have programs, Baby Safe Sleep, that address the co-sleeping deal because it's cultural with some folks. Yes, it can be unsafe. For example, if as a father or a mother, I'm drunk, that could be unsafe. If indeed it's a healthy environment, co-sleeping has existed prior to the invention of cribs. So again, back to the Aboriginal approach, we have to do what works for us. If we cannot rely on federal or state legislation and or funding, then we have to look internally. Our community has spending power. We have, in North Minneapolis, prior to things being burnt down, we would have several shoe stores on the same block. We would have several fast food restaurants selling unhealthy food on the same block. We would have 8 or 9 cell phone stores on the same block. Obviously, these businesses would not exist if there was not money involved. So there's money in our community. We need to stop asking for what we need and paying for what we want, and start paying for what we need. That is a fact. It can happen, whether we go to the synagogues, the churches, the mosque, whether we go to the barbershops, beautician places, whether we go to the drug dealers. And I mean legal and illegal. We can go CVS, Walgreens, and the brothers on the corner. We have our own solutions at our own disposal, if indeed we believe so. So, in closing, if we're looking for legislation or policy, that will have to come from influential white allies. If everyone that looked like me voted in the same direction and the votes aren't weighted, we will never win any election that's union, presidential, or local. We need allies to step up, become political, change laws, and or break them. For example, if we keep standing on an excuse of not giving families money because we'll violate their cash grant, we can all agree that the cash grant hasn't been increased since the mid 80s. Why are we still using that excuse? Because these families are not important. Let's be honest. Historically, there's precedent for all these things. For example, Amber Alert, these different legislation acts that happen after a white child is murdered. What about the 4 girls bombed in Birmingham? What about the children murdered in Atlanta? What about the 3-year-old that was killed on my block 3 years ago? Not a peep. Again, if we won't have allies to stand in between us and the constant attacks, then we'll continue to have cyclical compensation. So I would say, if you believe in legislation, demand that your elected officials do something other than talk.
You know, I just wanted to add to what Charles is saying about policies, is because often, as we've been talking about throughout this conversation, the impediments to both the presence and the participation of fathers in the lives of their children, particularly Black fathers, and the assumptions that's made that they just don't want to be involved, which we know is not true at all, because a lot of times they take a look at this by saying that fathers are not adequately involved in the lives of their children, especially if they're non-resident fathers. And we got many studies that shows the absolute different realities of that, in terms of fathers being more involved than other specific culturally communities, even including white fathers with their kids, and they co-parent better, as a matter of fact, even if they're not involved in the household. And we also see that, you know, there's a number of folks that push these policies that encourage marriage among these families as a way to foster child well-being for their success, and particularly the Black community. And we know that marriage is not always the solution for that, especially as it relates to a number of folks didn't grow up seeing healthy marriages model, healthy relationships model. And so it's not a solution just to put these two folks together and get them married, because typically in a lot of these low-income communities, particularly in Black communities, kids are born with not a whole lot of forethought, but doesn't mean that that's dad what doesn't want to fulfill his responsibility as a father. And so pushing marriage is not the only, that's one alternative solution, but it's not the only solution. So we got to meet these guys where they are, identify where they are, and meet them right where they're at. And so encouraging healthy relationships is what we tend to do, and what are the skills necessary in order to be able to have a healthy relationship romantically or even co-parenting wise. And it doesn't always mean that that is the only answer and solution to get these guys to be involved, because they're already involved, and marriage is not the only solution. But we have policies that are pushed that says these guys just need to get married, and in a lot of situations that's not the case, because you got two individuals that are necessarily even understand marriage, and definitely the father, and both in terms of what households they came from. So that's not the solution. The solution is more about how can you co-parent together and be most effective in raising your kids in a way that's healthy and happy, to help them kids, healthy and happy, and help them kids be safe.
May I interject, please? Uh, I thought you was about to speak, Andre. May I please say something first, sir?
No, go ahead, please.
Marriage, while it may be a beautiful thing to some, it cannot be one-sided, one size fits all. Example, if same-sex marriage is acceptable, why isn't polygamy acceptable? If every one Black man married one sister, we would still have a lot of sisters unmarried, strictly by numbers. We're going to ignore that fact? Again, if we can't be honest internally with our community and talk through some of these things, so we just gonna throw those sisters by the wayside? There are some cultures that call women throwaways if they're not married by a certain age. We gonna go with that? We're gonna continue to demonize the feminine energy and ignore it as if it's not vital to the survival of our people? So yeah, if we're gonna focus on marriage, let's be real about what will really work for our community.
That's right.
if that's the solution.
That's right.
And that's a great segue. What I was going to say is that, specifically in terms of state policy, there are some things that we need to pay attention to. And, I think that everyone here is, I would consider an ally if you have interests. And I know that we have Representative Pinto on, and thank you, Representative Pinto, for the work that you're doing. But at a state policy level, I think we really have to reform our child support system. I think that many fathers, especially African-American fathers, are being suffocated by that system. They are disproportionately affected. And when it comes down to specifically modifications, I know that there is some work that is happening. I believe it is a task force through MDH that is trying to do some reforms around specifically modifications. And so we need to get behind those efforts because that system not only impacts the father, it has an impact on the child and the family system. And so it has to work for all parties involved. And right now, it's just not, it's the scales are not balanced, if you will. And so I think, those are specific things that we can really be looking at, in addition to, looking at how we can build more father programs throughout our systems. I think is really going to be important here in the next, just in general.
And I'd like to just end with a little bit before moving into questions, and end with the idea that we do need stable support for fatherhood programs. I've been in the field for years, and the support comes and goes. What that does is takes away from the experience that's been built up to make a program successful. It goes away, and then we have to build it again, and it takes more resources. The other thing that I would say is the return on investment for programs for young Black fathers is huge when they're successful, because they're two-generation programs. They're helping the next generation grow up and have different kinds of role models, and hopefully be more successful in their own relationships with the mothers that they may be raising children with. So I think that the payoff is huge, but we oftentimes don't think of the return on investment as much as we should. So I would like to thank you all for, and we could go on and on talking about this, and we would like to see more stable resources. We would like to see a fatherhood commission in Minnesota as they have in other places. And so there are things that we can continue to talk about, but we wanted to give just a couple minutes to see if there are questions. And so I will go back to Jane and see if there are questions that you'd like to pose for our group.
Thank you. Thank you, Glenn. And thank you to all of our panelists today. It's just been a wonderful and moving morning. So thank you. I have one question I'm going to read from one of our colleagues about that, in just building a little bit on the child support question, that fatherhood and the payment of child support are currently kind of conflated, I guess is the best way to put it, that child support is assigned, but the opportunity to visit the child or be part of a parenting relationship with the kid doesn't happen. And are there opportunities to change that policy? That could be something an ally could help work on.
Yeah, so specifically, I know that there is a task force at MDH that is working on this, and I can't think of the exact name of the person that is leading that work, and I can certainly look that up. But, really getting behind those efforts to specifically address the modifications, which, it's only 4% of all fathers that receive a modification, and then about half of that is when you look at African-American fathers. And so getting a modification is very difficult, and circumstances change for fathers. We lose jobs, there's deaths, there's all kinds of circumstances, and those modifications can be helpful in terms of the sustainability and viability of the fathers that are involved.
Mm-hmm. And just to piggyback on that from what Andre is saying, I think it goes back to the policy discussion that Charles was talking about in terms of, and also Andre as well, as far as those child support policies. And Glenn as well, how do you continue to sustain fatherhood programs that are working, right? How do you, with proven models to be effective, particularly with programs that have a collaboration with child support, or encouraging child support to have partnerships with community organizations to be able to provide that information and education on how you navigate their system, flexibility that they have. You can't do that unless you sustain these programs. And so it needs to be a home at the state that funds programs, multiple programs in multiple counties and communities that believe fatherhood is important in terms of the impact on the lives of children and their opportunities for success. And so my point is that if you have a home where home for funding, you have a hub where dads can go, you have partnerships with child support, it can assist these guys in their effort to navigate that system, because they don't know. They don't have the information, they don't have the expertise, they get frustrated, they don't understand the process, and next thing you know, they're at the mercy of the child support system without not knowing what to do. And so a lot of times when our guys don't know what to do, what happens? They do nothing. So that's all the more reason to have a home for fatherhood, because these guys cross so many systems, but nobody seems to want to take fatherhood on. It's like a hot potato. Does it fall over here in this department? Does it fall in this department? Does it fall in this department? But more importantly, when you have programs that are proven, that are funded and supported, that have collaboration with child support, it makes that process of navigating the system much easier, because child support can be flexible. And I'm not saying it doesn't need to be reformed or reviewed or revised, but when you have a program that's a home, that's working in collaboration with child support, you can send a guy to easily better be in position to be able to change his circumstances when they're working directly with them.
Okay, we are down to our last 3 minutes, and so we have to move to one more slide. But I just want to say, this is not the last conversation. We just have to keep working on this, and I'm really grateful for truly shining a light today. I mean, I feel like we've been in a living room with you, and it's been a blessing, and really a source of good discomfort, in the sense of, we share with you, and we want to continue to hold this space. So I want to thank our people from St. Thomas, who are a great team. Special thanks to all of you, and then also to those of you who have attended, those of you who are presenting, and then I will just give a shout out that our next regular quarterly forum for the prenatal to 3 policy work is October 14th from 9 to 10:30, and we'll plan to have some kind of a brief follow-up about, as we are able to think with all of you who have helped us in developing this program today, about where we go next. And wish you all a wonderful remainder of the day, and we'll be in communication as this time moves forward. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jane. Thanks, Glenn.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Diana.
We can't hear you, Jane. I think you have to mute yourself.
Oh, there we go. But yeah, I just have to say thank you so much.